Chris Doumitt has broken his silence. And what he's revealed makes every gold jackpot Parker ever bragged about look small. For years, fans assumed the biggest surprises in that mine made it into the episodes. They didn't. According to Chris, some of the most shocking nights, finds, and confrontations were never aired. They weren't just cut, they were buried. Not for pacing, not for editing, by direct order. From Parker, and Chris didn't let it all disappear. He kept the SD card, he kept the notes, he kept the audio files that were supposed to be wiped from existence. Now he's exposing the one moment Discovery refused to let anywhere near the screen. The second Parker Schnabel realized they were digging up something that wasn't gold, wasn't geological, and had no business being beneath a mining site. If you think you know how Parker runs his claim, Chris is about to rewrite that reality. So before we dive in, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is footage Parker never intended the world to see. From the second this raw interview begins, you can feel it. That thick, crushing silence that doesn't drift in. It drops like a load of gravel. Chris is casually talking through a harmless behind-the-scenes story when he suddenly stops mid-sentence. His gaze slides off camera, like he's just tripped a wire he forgot was strung there. Then he lets it slip. Not loud, not dramatic, almost offhand. Yeah, that clip Parker told me never to show anyone. And the entire room freezes. The boom operator lowers the mic. The producer's head snaps up. Even Chris looks stunned by what he just said, like the words escaped before he could swallow them. It's the face of someone who instantly realizes he's said something he never planned to speak out loud. The voiceover catches it too. This isn't Chris joking around. His expression drains. The calm, steady demeanor he always had on the claim disappears. He tries to laugh it off, but the sound feels wrong, tight, tense, like he's desperate to rewind 5 seconds of his life. His hands start to shake. Not a small tremor, an unmistakable shake. The producer leans forward. Chris, what footage? He dodges eye contact, scratches his cheek, fidgets with his hat, stalling, visibly rattled. He opens his mouth, closes it, forces another laugh no one believes for a second. The producer repeats the question, slower this time, like she already senses she shouldn't. Finally, Chris sighs, shoulders sinking. The card, the one I wasn't supposed to keep. And just like that, the air in the room disappears. Because everyone on the Gold Rush team remembers the chaos surrounding that missing card. What Chris confesses next changes everything about that early season. He describes a mechanical failure on the far bench, the excavator tearing through a power line, the frantic shutdown, the chaos. In the madness, a field camera took a brutal hit. Everyone assumed it was toast. Parker even said, "Nothing salvageable. Leave it." The camera was hauled back, cracked open, and dumped in the scrap pile. Everyone believed the SD card inside was ruined, corrupted, useless. But no one knew Chris secretly recovered it. It wasn't melted. It wasn't shattered. It was stuck. He popped it out, wiped it clean, slipped it into his pocket, and told no one. Not Parker, not production, not anyone. And why did he hide it? Because what he saw on that card was the night everything shifted for Parker, and nothing was the same afterward. Chris says he's watched the footage in private for 2 years, 2 years of holding on to something he wasn't even sure he was legally allowed to speak about. Then he takes a long breath and starts describing what that camera recorded. It doesn't open on gold. It doesn't open on machinery. It opens on Parker, alone, well past midnight, headlamp on, walking tight circles near the tailings, muttering to himself. The camera shouldn't have been recording, but Chris had left it on standby, and the low-light mode had kicked in. That's when it captured the moment no one on the crew was ready for. Parker isn't muttering to himself. He's arguing with someone just outside the frame, and the voice answering him, nobody recognizes it, not a miner, not a local, not a crew member. A voice no one has ever heard on the claim. The figure never steps into the light, but Parker is clearly pacing, pointing, furious, saying things like, "You weren't supposed to be here, and we didn't agree on this." This isn't the usual tension the show sometimes hints at. This is sharper, personal. Then Parker suddenly stops, turns, and stares directly into the camera, like he's only just realized he's being recorded. In an instant, he switches off his headlamp. Darkness swallows everything, except for the faint glow of idling machines. Then you hear his voice, low, urgent, "Shut it all down, now." Not a request, a command. Seconds later, the entire site goes black. Generators off, lights dead, total darkness, but Chris's camera is still rolling, silent, hidden, recording everything Parker thought was gone. The final seconds show Parker reaching toward the unseen figure. Then the audio spikes, a hard thump hits the mic, and the file cuts like someone ripped the camera away. Chris says that moment was why he could never delete the card, because whatever Parker was dealing with out there, it wasn't the Parker viewers think they know, and he clearly meant to bury it deeper than any gold layer on the claim. Chris finishes by saying one line that turns the entire room to ice. Parker wasn't alone out there, and that night wasn't an accident. He doesn't explain. He doesn't clarify. He just looks away, and the weight of 2 years of silence sinks over the room like a storm ready to break. Before anyone speaks, before anyone can react, the SD card auto-advances, loading the next hidden file Chris never showed the crew. The video jumps, not because the story ends, but because the card kept recording everything Parker wanted, erased. Midnight darkness cuts to harsh morning light, revealing a rock shelf that looks totally wrong for the claim. Tilted at a bizarre angle, one side smoothed unnaturally, the other aligned too perfectly, like it was shaped, not formed. Something man-made, something intentional, something buried. And that's just the beginning. Parker is crouched beside the formation, palms pressed to the surface as if searching for hidden joins. You can hear his breathing on the audio, not out of exhaustion, but unease. He keeps sweeping loose dirt away from the edges, uncovering more of a shape that shouldn't exist, especially not in untouched ground, with zero history of man-made structures. Chris explains that this entire area was purposely kept off camera because Parker ordered the crew not to film anywhere near it. At the time, nobody questioned the decision. Parker often blocks off dead zones that don't make good TV, but this wasn't a dead zone. This was something he didn't want documented at all. The raw audio picks up Parker whispering, "This isn't on any map. Who put this here?" It isn't excitement in his voice, it's realization, like he suddenly understood the land itself was lying. Then Parker does something no one on the crew has ever seen before. He pulls a marker from his pocket and draws a symbol on the stone. Not a target, not a standard marker, something angular, geometric, unfamiliar. Later, when Chris shows a still frame of it, nobody recognizes the shape. According to Chris, the moment the crew left that site, Parker returned before sunrise the next morning. Alone. No cameras, no mic pack, no producers, just him, a backpack, and a handheld metal detector he never checked out from the equipment trailer. Chris only knows because he was up early prepping the wash plant. He saw Parker heading up the ridge fast, too fast, like he didn't want witnesses. Parker isn't normally secretive. He's blunt, open, and straightforward. But that morning was different. He moved like someone trying not to be seen. Chris followed from a distance, staying low behind the tailings pile. From there, he watched Parker kneel beside the same exposed rock shelf. When Parker powered up the detector, the reaction wasn't normal, not even close. Instead of the usual chirps miners tune out by instinct, the detector screamed. A piercing, constant blast that made Parker rip his headphones off. Even from far back, Chris could see the numbers on the display spike beyond the top of the scale. The strongest reading they'd ever had on the claim. Stronger than gold, stronger than bedrock ore. But Parker didn't dig. He didn't call for equipment. He didn't alert geology. He immediately shoveled dirt back into the opening, covering it up like he was erasing evidence. Chris could hear him mutter, "We're not showing this. Nobody sees it." Not excited, not proud, terrified. Chris says Parker sounded exactly the way he did the night he argued with the unseen figure in the dark, shaken, rattled, trying to hold himself together. And that morning, everything shifted. The very next day, Parker called an unplanned meeting in the canvas office trailer. Everyone assumed it was about downtime or equipment issues. Totally routine. But when Parker walked in, holding papers instead of a safety folder, the room's energy changed instantly. He didn't pace. He didn't explain. He just said, "Before we go any further, everyone signs this." No context. No discussion. They weren't NDAs. Those were standard. Everyone had signed those long ago. These were different. Parker called them secrecy amendments, and the language was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Sections referring to undocumented subsurface assets, clauses outlining restricted geospatial anomalies, dense legal language that looked far more like government paperwork than mining documents. Even the most experienced guys, the ones who had survived breakdowns, floods, frozen ground, looked uneasy. Tony Beats sent his team through worse risk with fewer rules than this. Nobody wanted to sign, but Parker wasn't leaving space to refuse. The tension got so thick that Rick finally asked, "What exactly are we protecting?" Parker didn't answer. He just stared at the room, expression shut down, voice cold. Someone else asked if this was about mineral rights. Another joked weakly that maybe Parker found an alien spaceship. No one laughed. When pens finally started scraping across paper, the sound was sharp and uneasy, like everyone signing their names into something far bigger than they understood. The contract never mentioned gold, never mentioned boundaries, never described what was off limits. Just that phrase, unverified subsurface assets. None of them had ever heard wording like that on a gold claim. Afterward, work didn't feel normal anymore. Crew members whispered. Operators checked over their shoulders. The trust that held the team together had a fracture down the center, and it split wider every time Parker looked toward the ridge or flinched when someone brought up the rock shelf. Parker refused every question. He kept the detector readings to himself. He avoided that entire area unless cameras were off, rearranging shooting schedules constantly, something he never did. Chris says the mood of the claim changed from that moment on. Suddenly, every vibration, every tremor, every odd sound carried a question mark. Nobody dared say it out loud, but the entire crew started watching the earth like Parker did, waiting for it to move back. And then the first sign appeared. Not from a person, from the machines. The bulldozer parked closest to the rock shelf began to malfunction, like its circuits were tearing themselves apart. Lights flickered, died, then exploded into a glare so bright it shouldn't have been possible. The engine coughed, then surged even though nobody was touching the controls. At first, it looked like electrical strain. Happened sometimes, but then the lights snapped off, plunging the ridge into darkness, before popping back to life in a violent strobe that made the entire site feel hostile. Chris recalls how the standby camera picked up shadows that didn't match any crew member, shapes stretching across the rock face despite no one standing near the light. The footage zooms toward the Cat 315's left flank, and suddenly hydraulic fluid blasts out in a harsh spray. Operators rushed over, assuming a line blew under pressure. Happens under intense work. But when they inspected the hose, everything changed. The line wasn't worn, it wasn't weakened, it was sliced, clean, precise, deliberate, sabotage. Parker arrived seconds later, faster than anyone had ever seen him move during a danger call. And when he saw the cut, his face drained completely. Not confusion, recognition. He crouched beside the hose, ran a finger along the incision, and Chris says, "You can see the exact moment Parker understood what this meant." He whispered, "No, not again, not here." As if reliving something he'd never spoken about. Whoever made the cut targeted only the machines closest to the rock shelf, and did it subtly enough to pass as mechanical failure if nobody looked closely. That night, Parker locked himself in the radio shack for nearly an hour. When he came out, every log from that night, emergency calls, transmissions, private channel chatter, was gone. Not replaced. Not overwritten. Erased. Like someone wanted all voices near that ridge wiped clean. Then comes the footage Chris says he wishes he could unsee. The standby camera captures a figure near the freshly reburied opening Parker hid earlier. The image is hazy. Dust, distance, poor light, but the silhouette is wrong. Too tall, too broad through the shoulders. And the boots? Not mining gear. Sleek, reflective, tactical. The figure doesn't move like a miner either. No hesitation. No testing the ground. They walk like they know exactly what lies beneath. Parker spots them first. He storms toward the shape, shouting, though the mic only catches muffled fragments. The figure doesn't run, doesn't back away, just stands there. The moment Parker reaches the stranger, the camera loses focus, blurring the scene. Then, silence. Not technical failure. Chris is convinced Parker muted the audio before anyone else could hear what happened. The next shot shows Parker walking back alone, breathing hard, face tight, jaw locked like steel. Later, when the crew gathers, rattled, confused, Parker delivers a single sentence. Nobody saw anything. Understood? Not a question, a command. Chris hesitates before saying what he believes started all of this. The metal reading. The signal Parker tried to bury. Because that scan wasn't gold. Gold doesn't form angles. Gold doesn't return a perfect square signal. Gold doesn't behave like a solid plate instead of scattered minerals. The reading Parker saw was too clean, too uniform, too engineered. It wasn't geological, it was constructed. When Chris first saw the detector recording, his reaction wasn't excitement, it was confusion. Signatures like that do not exist in Yukon soil. Not in that shape, not in that density, not that deep. After that morning, Parker became consumed, quietly obsessed. Chris remembers finding pages in Parker's bunk area covered with sketches of the formation, diagrams of the signal, attempts to map the shape underground. And that same geometric symbol Parker drew on the rock shelf kept reappearing over and over in his notes. He never shared the readings, never called geology, never notified producers. And that was the biggest red flag. Parker doesn't hide gold, not from the network, not from the crew, not from history. Whatever he found wasn't gold, and he didn't want it found again. What unsettled Chris most wasn't the discovery itself, but how Parker behaved after deciding it was off-limits. He didn't just avoid that ridge, he wiped it from existence. Scheduled scans were cancelled. Memory cards from the rover rigs vanished. Drone footage that accidentally caught aerial glimpses of the formation was deleted frame by frame. Even the editors were ordered to cut any background shot where that section of the ridge appeared, no matter how distant or blurred. When Chris finally asked why they were cleaning the archives, Parker didn't snap or raise his voice. Instead, he gave him a look drenched in exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying something heavier than equipment. Some things, he said, barely above a whisper, aren't meant to be dug up, and if we pretend they're not there, maybe they stay buried. But Chris never believed it, not for a second. Everything about Parker's reaction, his urgency, his silence, the way he shut down any conversation about the ridge, told Chris that whatever they uncovered wasn't just strange, it was familiar, something Parker recognized instantly, something he refused to face, and refused to let the rest of them understand. From then on, the claim didn't feel tense, it felt observed. The SD card jumps forward again. This time, the recording captures a moment the crew never meant to save. Parker sits on the open tailgate of his pickup, shoulders folded inward, like the ground beneath him had shifted. His hands shake, not from cold, not from exhaustion, but from a weight no miner talks about on camera. The camera doesn't zoom. It doesn't intrude. It simply watches Parker slip into the one state the audience never sees, shaken, vulnerable, frightened by something he can't measure or control. He drags a sleeve across his face, trying to steady his breathing. But the mic picks up every tremor in his voice as he mutters, "If this gets out, they'll shut us down." They always do. Chris, filming from a distance, asked the question anyone would ask. Who's they? Parker doesn't answer. He doesn't even lift his head. He just keeps staring at the dirt as if the ground might answer for him. The silence that follows is louder than any explanation. When Parker finally speaks again, the words land like a commandment, slow, sharp, and final. Don't film the ridge. Don't film that formation. Some things are better left buried. And he repeats it, like saying it twice might force the truth underground again. Years go by before Chris works up the nerve to face what he kept secret. During a current interview, he slowly reaches into his jacket and pulls out the missing SD card the crew believed had been destroyed. The interviewer freezes, not expecting him to actually have it. Chris turns the card over in his hand, weighing it like a piece of physical guilt. When he inserts it into the laptop, the screen lights up with thumbnails no editor had ever touched. Misnamed clips, corrupted stills, raw footage the system never catalogued. But one file stands out. No date, no label. Just one chilling line burned into the metadata. Do not watch. 4:13 a.m. The room goes silent.